Dear listeners, I welcome you to my channel. Leave your comments and impressions, I value your opinion. I almost fell out of my chair when an unfamiliar female voice called me at work and said that my wife was cheating with her elderly father. My fingers froze over the keyboard and I nearly dropped the phone. The voice continued, calm and confident. Apparently, she has serious plans for him, or rather for his inheritance. Who is this? I stammered, my mind struggling to grasp the situation. My name is Michelle. I'm 25, and we need to meet. I think we can help each other, she replied. Help each other? I echoed, still reeling from her initial bombshell. What are you talking about? Meet me at the coffee shop on 5th and Main at 6 p.m. I'll explain everything, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. The line went dead before I could ask any more questions. I sat there, staring at my phone, a mix of shock and anger bubbling inside me. My wife, cheating, and with someone's elderly father for his inheritance. It sounded like something out of a bad soap opera. But there was something in Michelle's voice, a certainty that made me believe she was telling the truth. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. I couldn't concentrate on my work, my thoughts constantly drifting back to the phone call. Who was Michelle? Why did she want to help me? And most importantly, what was my wife up to? As the clock neared 6, I grabbed my jacket and headed out, my mind still racing. The coffee shop was only a few blocks away, but it felt like the longest walk of my life. When I arrived, I scanned the room, looking for anyone who might be Michelle. A young woman in a corner booth caught my eye. She had long, dark hair and an air of determination about her. She looked up and made eye contact, giving me a slight nod. I walked over and sat down across from her. Michelle? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Yes, she said, extending her hand. You must be Tom. I shook her hand, still feeling a bit dazed. You've got a lot of explaining to do. She nodded, her expression serious. I know this is a lot to take in, but I have proof. Your wife, Emily, has been seeing my father for the past 6 months. She's been manipulating him, trying to get her hands on his money. I felt a surge of anger and betrayal. Why are you telling me this? What do you get out of it? Michelle leaned forward, her eyes intense. My father is a good man, but he's lonely and vulnerable. Emily is taking advantage of him. I want to stop her before she ruins his life. And I think you do too. I took a deep breath, trying to process everything. How do you know all this? I've been keeping an eye on my father since my mother passed away last year. When Emily came into the picture, I got suspicious. I hired a private investigator, and he found out everything. I have photos, recordings, texts. It's all here, she said, pulling a folder out of her bag and sliding it across the table. I opened the folder and began to go through the evidence. There were photos of Emily with an older man, receipts from expensive restaurants, and even love notes in her handwriting. My heart sank as I realized it was all true. I can't believe this, I muttered, my hands shaking. I know it's hard, Michelle said gently, but we need to stop her. My father doesn't deserve this, and neither do you. I looked up at her, feeling a mixture of gratitude and desperation. What do you suggest we do? Michelle smiled, a glint of determination in her eyes. We're going to make sure Emily gets what she deserves. But we have to be smart about it. We need a plan. I nodded, feeling a newfound sense of purpose. All right. I'm in. What's the plan? Michelle leaned in closer, her voice low and conspiratorial. First, we need to gather more evidence. Something that will hold up in court if it comes to that. We need to catch them in the act. I felt a knot in my stomach at the thought of spying on my wife, but I knew it was necessary. How do we do that? I have a friend who works in security. He can set up cameras and recording devices in your house without Emily knowing. We'll get everything we need, Michelle said, her tone reassuring. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of camaraderie with this woman I'd just met. All right, let's do it. Over the next few days, Michelle and I worked together, setting up the surveillance equipment and keeping a close eye on Emily's movements. It was exhausting and emotionally draining, but I knew it was the only way to get the truth. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we had what we needed. Clear, undeniable evidence of Emily's affair and her plans to con Michelle's father out of his money. We met again at the coffee shop, the weight of our discoveries heavy in the air. We've got her, Michelle said, her voice filled with a mix of triumph and sadness. I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and heartbreak. What do we do now? Michelle took a deep breath, her expression resolute. We confront her. Together. She won't be able to lie her way out of this. I nodded, feeling a sense of solidarity with Michelle. Let's do it. As we left the coffee shop, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of anticipation. This was just the beginning. Emily had no idea what was coming, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had control over my life again. As Michelle and I left the coffee shop, a cold wind whipped through the streets, mirroring the chill in my heart. We walked in silence, each lost in our thoughts about what lay ahead. The weight of the evidence against Emily was heavy, but the uncertainty of how she would react loomed even heavier. Do you think she'll deny it? I asked, breaking the silence. She might try, Michelle replied, her voice steady. But we have enough to corner her. She won't have a leg to stand on. We reached my car, and Michelle handed me a small flash drive. Everything's on here. Photos, videos, audio recordings. Make sure to keep it safe. I nodded, tucking the drive into my coat pocket. When do we do this? Michelle glanced at her phone. Tomorrow evening. We'll confront her when she's home. I'll bring my father. He needs to see the truth for himself. I felt a pang of sympathy for the old man. Is he ready for this? Michelle's eyes softened. He needs to be. It's the only way to protect him. The next day passed in haze. I barely made it through work, my mind constantly drifting to the impending confrontation. By the time I got home, my nerves were frayed, and every sound made me jump. Emily arrived home around 6, her usual bright smile greeting me at the door. Hey Tom, how was your day? Fine, I replied, forcing a smile. Just a bit tired, how about you? Busy as usual, she said, hanging up her coat. Anything special for dinner? Actually, I thought we could have takeout. Something simple, I suggested, trying to keep my tone casual. Sounds good to me, she said, heading towards the kitchen. I'll order something. I watched her, feeling a mix of anger and sorrow. This woman, who I thought I knew, was living a double life. But tonight, the truth would come out. At precisely 8 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. Emily looked up, surprised. Are we expecting someone? Yes, I said, my voice tight. You could say that. I opened the door to find Michelle and her father Richard standing there. Richard looked frail and uncertain, while Michelle's expression was one of steely determination. Come in, I said, stepping aside to let them enter. Emily's smile faltered when she saw them. What's going on, Tom? Who are these people? Why don't you take a seat? Michelle suggested, her tone cold. Emily glanced at me, confusion and worry in her eyes. Tom, what's happening? I took a deep breath, summoning my courage. Emily, this is Michelle and her father Richard. They have something to tell you. Michelle stepped forward, holding up her phone. Emily, we know about your affair with my father. We know everything. Emily's face went pale, and she stumbled back a step. What are you talking about? That's ridiculous. Don't lie, Michelle snapped, her voice sharp. We have proof. Photos, videos, recordings. You've been manipulating my father, trying to get your hands on his inheritance. Richard, who had been silent until now, spoke up, his voice trembling. Emily, is this true? Tears welled up in Emily's eyes. No, of course not. I love you, Richard. This is all a misunderstanding. Michelle shook her head, her expression one of disgust. Save it. We know the truth. I stepped forward, feeling a mix of anger and heartbreak. Emily, how could you do this? After everything we've been through? Emily's tears spilled over, but I couldn't tell if they were from guilt or desperation. Tom, please, you have to believe me. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Michelle scoffed. Didn't mean for what to happen? To seduce my father, to plan to take his money? Save your breath. Richard's face crumpled with sadness. Emily, I trusted you. I thought you cared about me. Emily sank to her knees, sobbing. I do care, Richard, I do. But things got out of hand. I didn't know what to do. Michelle looked at her father, her expression softening for the first time. Dad, let's go. We need to get you out of here. Richard nodded, tears streaming down his face. Yes, let's go. As they turned to leave, Emily reached out, desperation in her voice. Richard, please, I love you. But Richard didn't look back. Michelle guided him out the door, leaving me alone with Emily. I stared at her, my emotions in turmoil. Why, Emily? Why did you do it? She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. Tom, I was scared. I didn't know what to do. Richard was kind to me, and I got caught up in it. Kind? I repeated, my voice rising. You were using him, Emily, for his money. She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. I know. I know. I'm sorry, Tom. I'm so sorry. I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Emily. But right now, I need you to leave. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear. Tom, please. Don't do this. Go, I said, my voice firm, just go. Emily gathered her things, her movements slow and defeated. As she walked out the door, I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. The woman I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone I could no longer trust. The next few days were a blur of emotions. Michelle and I stayed in touch, making sure Richard was okay. He was heartbroken, but with Michelle's support he began to heal. As for me, I started to pick up the pieces of my life. It wasn't easy, but I knew I had to move forward. Emily's betrayal had cut deep, but it had also opened my eyes. I was stronger than I realized, and with time, I knew I would heal too. One evening, as I sat alone in my living room, my phone buzzed with a text from Michelle. Thank you for everything, Tom. We couldn't have done this without you. I smiled, feeling a sense of closure. Thank you too, Michelle. Take care of your father. I put my phone down, looking around the empty room. It would take time, but I knew I would rebuild. And with the truth finally out in the open, I could start anew. Days turned into weeks, and the initial shock of Emily's betrayal began to subside. Life continued in its monotonous rhythm, but the wound she had left was far from healed. Michelle and I kept in touch, supporting each other as we navigated the fallout. Richard was slowly recovering, and Michelle's dedication to her father was unwavering. One evening, as I was sorting through some old paperwork, my phone rang. It was Michelle. Tom, we need to talk. Can we meet? She said, her voice urgent. Sure, what's going on? I asked, a sense of foreboding creeping in. It's about Emily. I think there's more to this than we realized. Meet me at the coffee shop in an hour, she replied before hanging up. An hour later, I walked into the coffee shop to find Michelle already seated in a corner booth, a folder in front of her. She looked up as I approached, her expression serious. What's this about? I asked, sitting down. Michelle pushed the folder towards me. I did some more digging. There's something else you need to see. I opened the folder and found more photos, documents, and transcripts. As I sifted through the papers, Michelle explained. After our last meeting, I couldn't shake the feeling that Emily's motives went deeper than just greed. I hired the investigator again to look into her past, and we found something disturbing. Emily has a history of manipulating wealthy older men. Richard wasn't her first victim. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. You're saying she's done this before? Michelle nodded. Yes, she has a pattern. She finds lonely, wealthy men, gets close to them, and then exploits them. She's been doing this for years. I clenched my fists, anger boiling inside me. How did I not see this? How did she fool me? She's very good at what she does, Michelle said softly, but we can stop her. We have enough evidence to expose her. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. What's the plan? Michelle leaned in, her eyes blazing with determination. We're going to expose her publicly. We need to make sure she can't do this to anyone else. I've arranged a meeting with a journalist who's willing to cover the story. They're meeting us at Richard's house tonight. I nodded, feeling a mix of dread and resolve. All right, let's do this. That evening, Michelle and I arrived at Richard's house. Richard greeted us at the door, looking weary but resolute. Are you sure about this? He asked, his voice tinged with apprehension. We have to do this, Dad, Michelle said, her voice firm. It's the only way to stop her. Richard nodded, his shoulders slumping in resignation. All right. Let's get it over with. The journalist, a sharp-eyed woman named Laura, arrived shortly after. We sat in the living room, and Michelle laid out all the evidence we had gathered. Laura listened intently, taking notes and asking questions. This is quite a story, Laura said, her eyes gleaming with interest. If we go public with this, it will make headlines. But you need to be prepared for the backlash. Emily will fight back. We're ready, Michelle said, her voice unwavering. We need to stop her. Laura nodded. All right. I'll start working on the article. We'll need to get statements from all of you. This will take a few days to put together. As Laura left, Richard sank into a chair, looking exhausted. I can't believe this is happening. I know, Dad, Michelle said, kneeling beside him. But we're doing the right thing. Over the next few days, Laura worked tirelessly on the article, interviewing us and compiling the evidence. The anticipation was nerve-wracking, but we knew we had to see it through. Finally, the day came. The article was published, and it was explosive. Emily's history of deceit and manipulation was laid bare for the world to see. The response was immediate and overwhelming. News outlets picked up the story, and social media buzzed with outrage and condemnation. Emily's reaction was swift. She denied everything, calling it a smear campaign and threatening legal action. But the evidence was undeniable, and public opinion was against her. Her reputation was in tatters. A few days later, Michelle called me again. Tom, we need to meet. There's been a development. We met at the coffee shop, and Michelle's expression was grim. Emily's fighting back harder than we expected. She's trying to turn this into a he said, she said situation. We need more evidence to shut her down for good. I frowned, feeling a sense of dread. What kind of evidence? We need someone from her past to come forward. Someone who can corroborate our story and show a pattern of behavior, Michelle explained. But how do we find someone like that? I asked, feeling overwhelmed. I've already started looking, Michelle said. And I think I've found someone. Her name is Lisa. She was involved with Emily's previous victim. I've reached out to her, and she's agreed to talk to us. All right, I said, feeling a glimmer of hope. Let's meet her. We arranged to meet Lisa at a quiet park the next day. As we waited, I felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation. Finally, a woman approached us, her expression wary. Lisa? Michelle asked, standing up. Yes, Lisa replied, glancing around nervously. Are you Michelle and Tom? Yes, thank you for meeting us, Michelle said, her voice gentle. We know this is difficult, but we need your help. Lisa nodded, taking a deep breath. I'll tell you everything. Emily destroyed my life too. I want to see her stopped. As Lisa recounted her story, it was clear that Emily's pattern of deceit and manipulation was long-standing and well-practiced. Lisa's testimony was the missing piece we needed to solidify our case. With Lisa's help, we compiled even more damning evidence against Emily. Laura updated the article, and the new information further discredited Emily's denials. Public opinion turned even more sharply against her, and legal authorities began to take notice. Emily's house of cards was collapsing, and there was no way out. She had fooled us all, but in the end, the truth prevailed. As the dust settled, I felt a sense of closure and justice. It wasn't easy, but we had done the right thing. The future still held many uncertainties, but one thing was clear. Emily's reign of deceit was over, and with that, we could all start to heal and rebuild our lives. Days passed since Lisa's damning testimony and the updated article, which had effectively destroyed Emily's web of lies. The legal authorities had opened an investigation, and the public outrage was palpable. Michelle, Richard, and I felt a sense of closure slowly starting to settle in. But something still gnawed at me. A loose end that didn't sit right. One evening, as I was organizing the files related to Emily's case, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I hesitated and then answered. Tom speaking. Tom, it's Lisa, came the voice on the other end, sounding hurried and anxious. We need to talk. It's urgent. Lisa? What's wrong? I asked, concern creeping into my voice. Not over the phone. Meet me at the park where we talked last time. Now. I grabbed my coat and rushed to the park, the chill of the evening air biting at my skin. Lisa was waiting on a bench, looking around nervously. I approached her, my mind racing with possibilities. What's going on, Lisa? I asked, sitting down beside her. There's something I didn't tell you, she said, her voice trembling. Something important. What is it? I pressed, my heart pounding. It's not just Emily. She's part of something bigger, Lisa whispered, her eyes darting around. She's working with someone. A partner. My blood ran cold. A partner? Who? Before Lisa could answer, a shadowy figure emerged from the trees. I recognized the tall, imposing silhouette instantly. It was Richard. "Dad?" Michelle's voice rang out from behind me, and I turned to see her standing there, shock etched on her face. Richard stepped forward, his expression cold and calculated. "I see the cat's out of the bag," he said, his voice devoid of the warmth I had once associated with him. "Richard, what's going on?" I demanded, standing up to face him. "It's quite simple, really," Richard said, a sinister smile playing on his lips. "Emily and I have been partners from the start. We've been running this scheme for years. She seduces wealthy men, and I step in to play the concerned family member, ensuring we get our hands on the money." Michelle gasped, tears welling up in her eyes. "Dad, how could you?" "Don't act so surprised, Michelle," Richard said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You always thought you were so much better than me, but you never had the guts to do what needed to be done. Emily and I, we're survivors. We do what we must." I felt a surge of anger and betrayal. "You used your own daughter to play the victim. How could you stoop so low?" Richard shrugged, his smile widening. "It was easy, and it worked, didn't it?" Lisa stepped forward, her face pale but determined. "You won't get away with this, Richard. We have enough evidence to put both you and Emily away for a long time." Richard laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the park. "You think you can stop us? You have no idea who you're dealing with." At that moment, the sound of sirens filled the air. I turned to see police cars pulling up, their lights flashing. Richard's smile faltered, and for the first time, a flicker of fear crossed his face. "What did you do?" he hissed, turning to me. "I called the police," I said, my voice steady. "I had a feeling something wasn't right, so I made sure they were on standby." As the officers approached, Richard made a desperate move, lunging towards Lisa. But before he could reach her, Michelle stepped in front, blocking his path. "Stay away from her, Dad," Michelle said, her voice strong despite the tears streaming down her face. "It's over." The police quickly subdued Richard, cuffing him and leading him away. Emily, who had been in hiding, was also apprehended soon after, thanks to the information Lisa provided. As the chaos settled, I turned to Michelle, who stood there shaking, tears of both relief and heartbreak on her face. I pulled her into a hug, feeling a mix of emotions myself. "It's finally over," I whispered, trying to comfort her. "Yes," she said, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "But at what cost?" In the weeks that followed, the full extent of Richard and Emily's schemes came to light. They had defrauded numerous victims, leaving a trail of broken lives and shattered trust. But with the evidence we had gathered, they were both sentenced to long prison terms. Lisa's bravery in coming forward was commended, and she finally found some closure for the pain she had endured. Michelle and I supported each other through the aftermath, our bond growing stronger in the face of such adversity. One evening, as we sat together reflecting on everything that had happened, Michelle turned to me, her expression thoughtful. "You know, Tom, I never would have imagined my own father being capable of such cruelty," she said softly. "I know," I replied, squeezing her hand. "But you showed incredible strength. You stood up to him and helped bring the truth to light." Michelle smiled faintly. "And you were there every step of the way. I couldn't have done it without you." As we sat in the quiet comfort of each other's presence, I realized that despite the darkness and betrayal, there was still hope. We had faced the truth, no matter how painful, and come out stronger on the other side. And as we looked towards the future, we knew that together we could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The past had left its scars, but it had also forged an unbreakable bond between us. A bond built on trust, resilience, and the unwavering belief that justice would always prevail. In the end, it wasn't just the revelation of the truth that mattered, but the strength we found within ourselves to confront it. And with that, we were finally free to begin a new chapter, unburdened by the shadows of the past.